Who's in control of your estate plan? Do you have an estate plan? If you don't have one, did you know that someone is still in control of your plan? Even though you don't even have one written? This is because there are two ways to basically design an estate plan or to basically have an estate plan. So the first way is by design. That's when you control it, you manage it, you create it, you craft it, you work with an attorney, you make all the plans, you put them in place. But the second and most common way is by default. And that means that if you die without a will, you die without a trust, you die without any plans, there's already a plan in place waiting for you. And that's who's in control. So who is that? Who is that person that's in control of your plan, all the property you worked hard for, all the money you worked hard to acquire and wanting to pass down? Who is in control if you don't have any plans written in place? And that person, that entity, is going to be the government. Without a plan in place, there is already a plan for you, and that is written into the law. Okay, we call it the statute, which is the law of the state wherever you are. Every state has their own probate code. Probate is the specialized area of court that deals with what to do with your property after you pass away. Also, what to do with your property and your affairs while you are under a disability. And so, if you leave nothing in place, absolutely nothing, the government is in control. The laws of your state will govern. And what this does is takes away, obviously, not just your control, your creativity, and it leaves your entire estate subject to those laws. Um, Often, this does not work well. Why? Because they have who can take what under the law, but that doesn't mean that it gels with your lifestyle. It doesn't mean that it gels with who you want to leave your property to. There are many different instances when this can go wrong. Just a few that we'll name here are leaving property to people who are not mature enough to handle it yet. That includes minor children who will then need their own guardian to take care of the assets, right? The money, the property that they can't yet manage. This includes stepchildren who, at least under the laws of the state of Michigan, oh, don't know what that is, cannot manage the property. They can't inherit the property. So, quick story, I was in court one day and there was a case going on where a man died without a will, and his wife stepped up to be the person to take care of his affairs. Excuse me. And she inherited a sum of money from a company that may have been responsible for his death. Either way, they settled that matter. And they came to an agreement that the wife and this man's stepdaughter, who was an adult, this man's stepdaughter, would split the proceeds. Okay, so everybody's agreeing, but the judge said no. Why? Because the man had no will, there was nothing in place, and under the laws of the state of Michigan, stepdaughter cannot inherit. The man never legally adopted her to become his legal daughter. It was only a step daughter, step parent relationship. And under the laws, she couldn't take it. So even though everything else was worked out and the family had these plans in place, right, that they were negotiating, she couldn't take it. And the sum was like $100,000. So she's missing out on $50,000 because there's no plan in place. That's how much was at stake for her. And that's how much control, right, the governing statutes will have. They can cause your own family members to miss out on $50,000 or more, right, just because it doesn't fit their needs, it doesn't fit their plan. All right, that's just one scenario. Another scenario, and I have many of these, I won't go into all of them today, but another scenario is if no one steps up to take the property, if no one steps up to even open up a case in court, you can completely lose the property. Because at the end of the day, if there's no family members, if nobody's stepping up, there is somebody who will always take the property back, who will always resume control, who will always get control of the property. And again, that's going to be the government. It's a process called a sheeting. You don't need to know that legal term, but basically what that means is if there's some property out there, somebody passed away, nobody ever stepped up to take it, the government can take the property back. The government can be the ultimate, what we would call beneficiary of the property. And so this is another real life example of this happening quite some years ago, but I'm sure it happens all the time. And it's happened in real life, right? It's a real story. A young mother passed away, relatively young. She was 45 years old, had a minor child, no will in place, no plans in place, anything like that, but did own a home, single mother too. So she had full custody of the child, everything like that. Didn't leave any plans in place, caused two different probate scenarios. One turned out okay, the other one terrible. All right, so let's talk about the one first. Had a minor child, didn't name anybody to take care of a child because there's no will, there's nothing there. There was a minor dispute between a sister and the godmother, but ultimately, as the child was the priority, she was taken care of, and she was later legally adopted by aunt, who was the mom's sister. Okay, so that's taken care of. That's okay, right? But here we go with the government. All right, because they always have their hands in something, and as much as we can minimize that, we want to do that so that our children don't have to deal with this. And this is what happens. Okay. So the second scenario was the house. She had an entire house, and it was a 2-family home too that she owned. But nobody ever stepped up to take control of the house. Nobody ever went to probate court to get the deed, right, to get control, legal ownership of the home, even for the care of the child. Nobody ever did that. So ultimately, what happened was the home went into foreclosure, right? Because that's another avenue that the government can get their money back. If you're not paying the property taxes, they can foreclose. So that's ultimately what happened. Nobody stepped up. The government took over, took control of the house, and demolished it. Okay, this was about 10 or 15 years ago. The child ultimately grew up, now has a child of their own. So instead of the home being a 3-generational home, it was completely destroyed. So 2 generations are at risk, all because somebody lived by the default plan, going by whatever is under the law. That doesn't always work. Okay, so this is just one scenario when that happened with the house. Again, we talked about the scenario with the stepchildren. All right. And then just one more. Okay, we're just going to one more, where money can just be held up unnecessarily for a long period of time. And this happens in different situations. But there was a case a couple of years ago where, unfortunately, parents died at the same time, and there was a sum of money that was owed to the surviving children, but there was no estate plan, no nothing in place. So a case had to be opened up, and ultimately the money that could have gone to the 2 children, it's about $20,000, $25,000, could have been passed on to them right away, but it needed to take 6 months, right, for it to go through the probate process and ultimately distributed. You don't have to wait 6 months to get that kind of money to your children in case of your death if you don't live by default, but instead live by design. Design is taking it into your own hands. So who's in control? You. Who do you want to be in control? You. Would you trust yourself more or trust the government more? Right? Not to say that to be suspicious, but there are plans in place already that may not gel, like we just saw in these examples, with what it is that you want. So the better option is to design it yourself. And how can you do that? Obviously, right? By working with an attorney to figure out what it is that would best suit your needs, what you're looking for, what you're wanting, what you are needing, what you're desiring in the future. And if not an attorney, just thinking about it for yourself until you get to that point, honestly. Worst case scenario, just leave some names on your accounts as a beneficiary to take over. Okay, worst case scenario. That way, those funds are at least not held up in court. All right. And I say that because that's a common mistake people make. They don't do it, and then $20,000, $50,000, $80,000 and up is just held up, and nobody can get to it. It's one question as to whether you want that kind of money going to one person or to be split between 2 people all at one time, right? That's one question. But another one is, do you want it to be held up for months on end and possibly a percentage taken out because you have to go through this court process? That's a totally different scenario, right? And so that's what we want to prevent more than anything, is that delay, and then that percentage, taken for things like court fees and court processing and all that stuff. So live by design. Work with somebody who is trained professional. Trained professional. I will say that even if it's not an attorney, maybe a wealth management advisor, somebody who does this, because I've seen a lot of people just on the internet talking as well, don't know what they're talking about. So be careful for that. But work with somebody who's going to have your best interests at hand. They're a trained professional. They know what they're talking about. They're going to warn you the pros and cons, but they're not going to scare you out of something, right? Just be honest with you about, if you go down this avenue, A, B, and C can happen, but you really want D, E, and F. So let's go over here, right? Making it that plain and simple. And then using common tools like a will, which, we can get into. That's just kind of where it starts. A lot of people think that's where it ends. It's just where it starts, okay? And it's really baseline for anybody who has any kind of property. And especially for people who have minor children, it's a must, okay? And we can probably get into that in later videos. But baseline will, and then we can work it up to a trust, right? And then there are different kinds of trusts to meet different needs. It all depends on what you're looking for. And then other common tools are businesses, right? Family businesses. And for even, I guess, the higher you go up the ladder, right? Institutions, so like schools, libraries, churches, like all these things that you're planning on building, they all go into your not just estate plan, but your entire legacy. So when it comes to this, who's in control? You be in control, okay? And how can you be the one in control? By not neglecting, number one, what's right in front of you, not devaluing what's right in front of you, really taking a cold hard look at what you have, where you are right now, and where you want to end up. When all this is over, which we're talking about life, because it will end, and being honest about that too. When it's over, when it's said and done, what do you want to leave behind? Who do you want to get those things? How do you want them to get it? Right? Uh, when? Like, what age? What time? You can do all these things, especially in a trust. There's a lot of creativity, a lot of flexibility. That's why I advocate for them. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people, can do a lot of good and be extended beyond the generations. Okay. But the point is not to kind of overwhelm you with all those options. The very simple point is that you want to be the one to take control of your things, because you're the one doing it right now anyway. You're the one out there working every day, or, putting so much work into that business that you started up, putting so much money into it, right? We know that. um, to see somebody just kind of take it over and then do what they want with it, or do it, they have to do with it because the law says so. You don't want that. You work too hard for that to happen to you. Okay, so the whole point is to just be the one. You be the one. You be the one who's going to make the change in your family. You be the one who's going to leave the legacy. You be the one who's going to shift the entire lineage from generational poverty to generational wealth by keeping it, maintaining it, preserving it, crafting and creating it. Okay, so that's the lesson for today. Really think about who is in control. Is it you? And if it's not you, let it be you. Start now. All right. Take care. We'll see you next time.